Welcome to COVID and Climate Change Correlations, a weekly video podcast where I, Daniel Sanderson, engage in a stimulating conversation with post-Keynesian economist Steve Keen.
I like the background. It looks good.
Yeah, it's good. This is one of Daniel's. So have you popped it Vox's way? Or I think yours looks beautiful, mate. I'd stick with those. Are those some of your... They're not your own production. They're your...
No. All the books right above my head.
Mm-hmm.
Those are Castelia Library.
Oh wow! So that's what mine's going to look like when I finally write it for you.
Yes, we will definitely be doing it in leather. Stephen, what am I saying? Daniel, what we're doing is building a bindery, and so that because we have a lot of subscribers, but right now we use an existing bindery in the States, but they have a lot of supply chain issues there too, and labor issues. So we realized that to grow, we needed to be in control of our own destiny. So we're building our own leather bindery.
Wow, that's really exciting. As a project that I'm actually working on with my son, he's quite a 60-year-old, quite a lover of books, and so father and son. He's 16, coming on 17, and we're looking at the Iliad, and we were going to go through the whole Iliad. So we picked up a translation of the Iliad that's out of copyright print, one that he actually chose. Ran it through a Barnes and Noble self-published piece, and we were going to have a look at it and then put like a preface. Actually, it's almost it would be more like an essay afterwards. We wanted to so many of the classic books, you see the essays prior to the
right.
And we always, my son and I have this thing back and forth that it's so silly to have it at the beginning. Like, why not have it as a commentary towards the end, after you've actually read the book. But so we've got a member community as well of writers and philosophers, and I am thinking about putting some print products out to them, something similar to that. So that'd be really interesting. I'd be very interested to know how that develops, because I think if I can see from the quality of the books behind you, that would be kind of a really cool thing. And
Well, maybe you'll become a customer of the bindery someday.
Yeah, exactly.
You never know. I mean, honestly, my goal was that we would be able to do 50 books print runs. Like, that was my goal. And we now have ended up, we're doing already 1,000 book print runs, with some of them in goat skin, special Italian goat skin with 22 karat gold and everything. It's kind of crazy, but they're honestly some of the most beautiful books in the world.
They look gorgeous as they are at the moment. Actually, can I just tell a little anecdote? And it's for the sheer fun of it. You just reminded me of it. I went to a New Year's Eve party in Australia ages ago, 30-something years ago. And it was New Year's Eve was a huge party in Sydney. And I had to get a taxi back home, and I was picked up by a taxi driver. And Australians, by habit, sit in the front seat next to the driver. And I sat there, he was enormous. And I mean, like Arnie Schwarzenegger, enormous Maori guy. I think he was Maori. And your first impression is this, ball of muscle, which would be quite intimidating, but there's something about him. We just had a chat, and I said, "So what do you do to relax?" And he answered, "I read the classics."
You never know.
It gets better. It's better. And I said, "Well, how did you get into that?" He said, "Well, I was living in Perth at the time, which is a very hot city in Australia." He said he came home and saw his wife and said, "It's hot as Dante's Inferno out there." And he said, "I realized I hadn't read Dante's Inferno." So I thought, well, I better buy a copy and read it. And he said, then my habit since then has become to buy books in the classics in the original, the earliest possible print run that I can find.
Yeah.
Now, here's a guy, you look at him and think, he'd work out in a gym or grunt. And that was his philosophy in his mind. I was so impressed. Wonderful person.
Oh, it's great. In fact, you see the light blue book above my head?
Yeah.
That's actually the Divine Comedy, Dante. It's actually got it's from the Venetian translation of 1597. So it's got all the. Well, when you send me the address, then we'll send you a copy of one of the books as well as the headset.
Guys, this just gets better and better. You have to realize what I'm doing is completely around the classics and returning to the classics as I'm not going to really say an economic model, but I do have kind of an economic model in mind. So what the idea is that we're releasing a school called the Planksip Academy, and we're looking to the it's the St. John's curriculum of the great books, right? So there's you've got your sophomore and senior, and you've got your 4 years of like an undergraduate sort of class of the classics. And so you're going to be talking about Plato, and talk about Euclid, and basically all of the founding sort of Western canon and tradition of books and philosophers and thinkers. So that's a project that we're releasing in January, and I wanted to include in that academy a course from Steve as well on economics. So one of my
that's going to be intriguing because Steve is not generally what one would consider to be 101 material.
No, it's not. Yeah. So but I have the thing that, we've talked a little bit about this show, and I think it's the best thing is to try and, summarize what he's saying and then build off of that. That's kind of the idea. And the course will kind of just take shape.
Well, I can write that for you in 5 minutes. And
Okay,
I can actually tell you in 30 seconds, I can summarize everything you need to know about Steve Keen's work in economics.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, here we go.
It's very simple. Everything you've ever read is wrong. When I was reading Debunking Economics, and keep in mind, I studied neoclassical at university. My professor, Steve Stamos, actually wrote the textbook. My dad had raised me on Milton Friedman, so I'd read, and I'm not just talking, my dad's went through the PhD engineering program at MIT.
Oh, right. Seriously.
So when he gave me Milton Friedman, I'm not just talking about Free to Choose. I'm talking about the hardcore essays on money and stuff. Yeah, I'm reading these when I'm like 15.
History of the United States. Okay, yeah.
No, not just that, but like the smaller, like the really intense stuff, the papers and all. And anyhow, so I'm very widely read, because then I had some Marxist professors, so they got me into reading the Marxist economists and so forth. And then I fell out more into the Austrian school for the most part.
Yeah.
But then I read Steve's Debunking Economics, and my jaw just dropped when I got to the point where he demonstrates conclusively and comprehensively that there's no such thing as a universal supply demand curve. It doesn't work. The math doesn't work. And that's when I realized all this stuff that I know is fundamentally structured on a completely false foundation.
Yeah.
And that's why I have no hesitation whatsoever saying that Steve is the greatest living economist, because there's nobody else that even comes close to that level of understanding what's fundamentally wrong with this quasi-science that has evolved over the past 200 years. I don't agree with a lot of his conclusions, his prescriptions, but his critiques are literally on the level of a Darwin or any other major intellectual figure you want to talk about, because he's proven that we need to start completely over.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I sound like a fangirl, but
I know I couldn't help it either. And I said last time, he goes, oh, you're making my head big. And I said, you deserve it. And he can see, Steve, it's not just me. I think that's what makes this series so pleasurable, is that look at that glowing breakdown of Steve Keen and his economics and what it says about you as a person. And there's nothing but honesty there, right? There's nothing.
And that's what I've got to come back in and say. That's why, like Vox and I would be politically on so many issues the other side of the room. But what I absolutely value, and applies to you as well, Daniel, is integrity and capacity to critically assess what your own beliefs are, which is both those things are quite rare. And that's why I'm in the room with both you guys.
And it's also why you don't have a Nobel Prize.
I never will. I mean, God Almighty, that's.
Wait a
minute. I have one other option here. It's not and this is not a binary choice, not a 0 or a 1. We're gonna offer something else. I said, Steve will accept the Nobel Prize, okay, and that will be the last Nobel Prize. He will shut it down.
There's no way. This is 100% guarantee. There's no way I'll ever get anything like that. But my little fantasy world where I do would have me bookending Hayek, because I think Hayek was the first recipient, wasn't he?
One of them, if not, yeah.
Yeah, he said there shouldn't be a Nobel Prize in economics.
Right.
And I would say exactly the same thing.
I tend to agree, especially because it's very clear. It was obvious for years, but then when they gave it to a pathetic voice of the establishment like Krugman, who's never done anything terribly significant, but what they really gave it to him for was the fact that he, kept writing New York Times articles saying what they wanted him to say. But it actually reached a new low this year when they gave it to Daniel Card, who said that, vastly increasing Miami during the cocaine boom proves that immigration doesn't affect wages. So all you need to do if you want to have mass immigration but not reduce wages is allow the importation of tons of cocaine. Talk about stimulating the economy.
Well, hang on, you're taking away an important cash source for the CIA there,
That's true. But they actually gave the guy the fake Nobel in economics because he came up with some incredibly lame excuse to try to deny a truth that everybody else recognizes.
Yeah, the other thing.
Inversion.
It's an embarrassment reading the people who got the Nobel Prize, with a few exceptions. One of the few people that I would say, okay, I'm happy that he got the prize, is Robert Shiller, because when you look at Robert's work, he even though he's strictly neoclassical, I actually attended a session of the American Economic Association annual conference, in which he spoke, where they were celebrating, I think, 50 years of the rational expectations hypothesis. And he was the only one there to make any quibbles about it. But he's well and truly on the inside, a Nobel Prize and so on. But he came up with the term irrational exuberance, and it wasn't just a term. He'd based it on doing work building a couple of empirical indices that showed the actual rate of house price inflation on the one side and the level of overvaluation of the stock market on the other. And they are very important empirical contributions. So he's one of the handful that I like. But you read Krugman's, his model of international trade, and you'll love this, Fox, has production involving labor and nothing else. Okay?
No inputs.
No capital. I criticize them for not having energy and resources in their models of production. But his Nobel Prize paper, and I found I thought I better read this damn thing. And there he assumes that production involves labor and no capital.
It is somehow fitting that his prize-winning work would be an example of the Ricardian vice.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the trouble. It was Schumpeter made that wonderful statement. I can't quite recall the exact text, but it's saying that all the complexities that troubled somebody else would not have caused Ricardo to lose a night's sleep.
Yeah, because you eliminate every variable except for the one that you want to point to.
Yeah,
and then it's not even it's just a tautology. He makes all of his proofs are tautological statements. That's the Ricardian vice,
and then that's the trouble. We have a so-called academic discipline, which is nothing other than a set of tautologies derived from empirically false foundations. And even then, I mean, the demand curve, I think that's the classic Astonishing on Mantel-Debreu conditions. The fact that they can't even logically derive a downward sloping market demand curve from their theory of individual consumption, and yet they just gloss over it completely.
Right. That was the thing that really blew my mind when I read Debunking Economics. That's when that was because obviously we know that it doesn't always fit. And so you have all these like epicycles or epitheories. It's just like when they're trying to like explain why the planets didn't move the way they're supposed to move, they come up with the epicycles. And economists did exactly the same thing with those. It was the luxury goods. What was the name for it?
The Giffen good argument.
The Giffen goods, and then they had some other arguments based on rarity and that sort of stuff, and they were all just excuses and epicycles that were meant to hide the fact that our observations were actually giving us a hint of the mathematical impossibility that you explicated in your book.
So actually, Dan, do you know that the third and final edition of Debunking Economics is going to be published by Vox?
No, but yes, you did. You mentioned that, and I think and it's going to show up on the shelf behind Vox.
Eventually.
Eventually. I mean, I've got two more tasks to get out of the way before I can start restart work on it, because particularly after doing the work I've done on climate, I've got to the point where I think neoclassical economics is the greatest threat to the existence of human civilization ever.
Even more than global warming.
Well, it's what's let global warming become the disaster that will probably undermine capitalism, destroy it.
And we still don't have a political clarity. People don't understand. I pointed out in the last, 8 or so episodes, it's very clear to me to see the fallacious thinking in the politics, and it's rather disturbing.
To the extent there's any thinking at all, one of the big problems in the West is that there's no possibility of anything that is reasonably truthful, regardless of whether it comes from the left or the right. Steve's on the left. I'm so far on the right that, people practically want to salute me on the street. But the thing is that both of us are not only banned by the mainstream press, but about the only media culture that's willing to pay attention to us, other than the dissidents, is the Chinese state media.
Yeah, that's true. I get a bit from China, Turkey, Russia. But nothing in the West. It's quite remarkable.
But that to me is indicative of part of the problem that you're talking about, Daniel, is that Steve obviously has proved his chops. I've contributed a few things here and there myself, and yet enough that people from other cultures and stuff are recognize it and want to hear about it, and yet the mainstream goes out of its way in the West to silence it. And the problem there is that you can see that what they're actively attempting to shut down is simply the truth, because they want to pursue that which fosters their perception, but it's a false perception. How do you build and maintain a society on a series of false perceptions?
Yeah, this is something that we want to talk about carefully. It's something I think about quite often. This idea of left and right censorship. So what I really want to think about is what does it mean to say silencing? Like, who's silencing? Is it's societies? It's not a pernicious individual or group of people? Is it something naturally that's happening as a characteristic of the market? Right? I mean, let's explore some of these things, because I want to know where you guys think it actually comes from. Who's the boogeyman?
I think it's the boogie system. And it's not just capitalism, or I think this is just a common thing in human societies coming out of what our nature as a species. Because if you think about what would you say are the defining characteristics of humanity compared to another species? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you ask what's the defining characteristics of a spider, you'd start with building a web, or poison, et cetera, 8 legs, blah, blah, blah. With humans, a whole lot of things suggesting, capacity to reason, et cetera, et cetera. I think the thing which really separates us is capacity to share beliefs.
That's exactly right. Yes, I will. Yeah.
And with that,
and intention. So if you want to come at it from a secular standpoint, intentionality prior to belief. I mean, I would even say anthropomorphically, you could make that.
Well, I think that you can. I think that that's accurate at the macro level. Mm-hmm. But you can be much more specific. Like, for example, I was told back when I was a columnist at the weekly columnist, my picture on the head of the column, and I was doing video game reviews, but they were very popular, and I was actually nationally syndicated by Chronicle Features, and I was only the 6th columnist in the 110-year history of the paper to be nationally syndicated.
Which paper is this, by the way?
The St. Paul Pioneer Press. It's in Minnesota. St. Paul Pioneer Press. Okay, And so it's been around for over 100 years. I'm only the 6th columnist to ever get nationally syndicated. Mm-hmm. They actually tend to market me as being like the smart young guy at the time, which this is many years ago. And the conservative guy. the conservative columnist on the op-ed page left to go to a paper in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. So I thought, hey, I'm the only guy on the right that they know at the paper. I'm already a columnist. I'm the obvious choice. So I go in and I go into the op-ed editor's office, and I said, hey, DJ's leaving. Can I have his spot? I think I'm the obvious candidate. Mm-hmm. And he said, Vox, I really like you. I love your column. It's a great asset. You're a great writer, and you're certainly, able to do this. He said, and I have to tell you right now, you will never, ever have a spot on this editorial page or any other newspaper editorial page.
Oh my!
Why? What's the reason?
Because my perspective, my thinking is too far outside the acceptable range. Yeah, and you don't get to the position of being a op-ed editor at a major metropolitan newspaper, or presumably the same position in the TV or something, without fitting the description, fitting the slot.
That's very revealing. And actually, there's a lovely anecdote for a very good friend of mine that I think, even though again your politics and his are very opposing, you would like immensely as a human being and a philosopher. That's Yanis Varoufakis. And have you read Adults in the Room, the book Adults in the Room?
No, I have not. No.
Highly recommended. It's a very personal and it reads like a thriller. It's a great piece of writing. It's his history of being the Greek finance minister. And it's,
right. Yeah, no, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. He's a great guy. I mean, Yanis and I met 30-something years ago. And when I was doing my PhD, he arrived as a newly senior lecturer, I think he was, which is halfway up the Australian scale, appointed from the UK on the basis that he was a mathematical game theorist and would therefore be a progressive guy who would be aligned with the conservative side of the department. He turned out he was a raving radical. Not raving, he's actually very, very As you've seen him speak, he speaks in private like he speaks in public, very oratorical style. Right. Lovely guy. And mathematics, he helped me undermine the mainstream, not support it. But he's opening in that book, I'm giving a bit away, but he goes to a bar in Washington and meets up with somebody who says, Giannis, you made a really, really bad mistake. And Giannis says, what is that? And he said, you got elected. And the person saying it was Larry Summers. And what then Larry told Giannis was, if you want to, you've got a choice to get on the inside here. You can be on the inside or the outside. He said the first rule of being on the inside is you don't criticize other insiders.
Right.
Same sort of
yeah,
thing.
it's that doesn't surprise me in the least. And but I have to say, even at the time, I appreciated it, but now I really, really appreciate it because think about the years that guy saved me from wasting.
Interesting. Good point. Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I get, because I'm a game designer. And so, it's like, okay, those are the rules. I am not eligible. I'll do something else. Now, the irony is that I did actually end up getting nationally syndicated again later for my political columns.
Yeah.
But I warned the Universal Press Syndicate guy. I said, look, you're not going to be able to sell my political columns anywhere. I said, I was told this years ago. It's like, no, but we think you're really great and this and that. But their actual goal was that I was going to be the replacement for William F. Buckley, who was retiring. And they managed to sell me to one newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, for about 2 weeks.
Oh, shit. So your original informant was quite correct.
Absolutely. 100%, not even getting nationally syndicated by the elite syndicate.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I don't understand though, Vox, because you gotta reveal some of it because there is a polarity right now in America that is going to say that there's conservatives and there's liberals, and so the conservatives wouldn't take you and the liberals wouldn't take you. It's not that you're politically homeless.
No, back then the conservatives would have, but the conservatives were not permitted. But basically, you were allowed one token conservative per editorial page. And so that's what surprised me. I thought I could be the token conservative, but they're like, no, you're too radical to be you're too radical to even be the token conservative.
Yeah, I'm
not a conservative at all. I mean, I think we've passed that.
Yeah,
this is back in my early 20s when I didn't really understand how things worked. But the thing is, there's the U.S. is the West in general, and the U.S. is kind of the flag carrier now. Inherited the mantle from Britain. It's a late stage empire.
Yeah,
and so like all late stage empires, it's now got a mostly foreign elite, and it's a mix. It's not all just this group or that group or whatever, but it's a melange. But the key thing is that every and Yoram Hazony has actually written about this as well. And every foreign elite has interests that are fundamentally divergent from the people. Because the empire is focused externally. That's why the U.S. has been engaging in wars for the last 60 years in places that half the people in the States couldn't even spell, and have no interest in fighting. But so that's what's going to be really interesting in the next few years, not just from an economic standpoint and not just from a political standpoint, but just from a geostrategic standpoint, because we're now entering a period that is the biggest change since 1989 and the fall of the Soviet Union. This transformation from a monopolar superpower structure
to a bipolar.
Well, it's actually tripolar at this point because China, Russia, both they're both serious regional powers now, and the U.S. has now been essentially degraded to the biggest regional power, and so that's going to have a tremendous effect on the economic patterns. We can't assume that the structural patterns of the neoliberal world order are going to survive. The Belt and Silk Road, all these sanctions for the past 20 years. All that's done is made all these different regional powers independent
and wishing to align with China more than America in that result as well.
Oh, no question at all. I mean, I get criticized a lot because they say, "Oh, you're pro-China, this and that." I'm like, first of all, the CPC member of 2021 is not the CHICOM of 1952. They've actually been through. They're now on their third ideological structure. And but like I said, I can't use Google. I can't use. They kick me off of Blogspot.
Okay.
I can't use YouTube. They kick me off of YouTube. But Tencent's happy to work with me.
Wait a minute. Who kicked you off? Someone kicked you off of YouTube?
Yeah. I'm technically, well, what they did is they didn't actually kick me off. They blocked me from being able to access my account.
Really? That's
yeah. So and then they did the same thing to my blog on Blogspot. Oh, and also it came out during the what was his name? The young guy, James Damore. It came out during the James Damore trial that I'm one of the people who is personally banned from setting foot on the Mountain View campus. Apparently, I'm very dangerous. You should probably have kept that in mind before inviting me.
But I'm not hearing what so let's go back to the conservative argument. I hear you saying, and if you don't like conservative argument, the idea is that if you could have been the voice for the conservative perspective, I don't see anything wrong with saying there's some national interests at play, and they seem to be the most long-term pragmatic approach to how we move forward as society. I don't understand why that's a bit of an issue.
Because you're not a globalist. That is offensive, racist, possibly anti-Semitic, and probably a few other ists that I don't know yet. But I mean, that concept is fundamentally unacceptable to the latest generation of the neoliberal world order.
Yeah.
And that's how, but of course, they're like what, third, fourth generation now? And just like all third or fourth generations, they're completely wrecking daddy's company.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's actually a bit of a type with what you're talking about, the elites in America as well, and the fact that they're not actually domestically oriented, whether they're domestically, nationals was another thing, but the huge relocation of production that occurred back in starting in the 1980s and transferring production to China, which was really outsourcing American labor jobs and exploiting low-wage workers in Asia to increase the profits of American capitalists. So and that's where the huge long supply chains have come from as well, which have now crushed during COVID because they're so fragile. So that is tied up with this idea of globalism, because one thing that group knows is that global things, you'll never get global coordination in the first place. So if you want to stop something happening, make sure it's made a global agenda. For example, global action on carbon, on climate change. And if you say, let's get a global carbon tax, first of all, a carbon tax will never come in because that will get politically opposed by the vast majority of the population who can't afford to pay the carbon price, the working class who no longer have jobs because you've outsourced their jobs to China. But secondly, it makes you look like you're doing the right thing of calling for something, and you know it's not going to happen. So you maintain the secure position of your elites in American society to begin with. There was that wonderful, did you see it? The investigative journalist, I've forgotten who it was, convincing two lobbyists in Washington who work for the coal industry in particular, that they were customers and wanted to know how good their lobbying was. And they went through the whole idea, we support a carbon tax because we know it'll never happen.
Huh. Yeah, the thing is that, and then on top of all that, the way that they completely failed to grasp that the Chinese wouldn't play along.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know if you followed the story, but ARM set up, they're a big chip maker.
The ones the ones that actually originated within England, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so. And anyhow, they set up an operation in China, and the CEO has essentially, the Chinese CEO has essentially completely taken it over.
Yeah.
And there's nothing they can do about it. It's just he's got the plants, he's got control, he's got the bank accounts, he's got control of everything, and they're like trying to complain to the Chinese government. The Chinese government are like, we have investigated and we don't see that he's done anything wrong.
Yeah, I mean, this is what China's major weakness is an industrial power, is that it hasn't managed to master chip manufacturing. So if they're doing that, that's obviously massively strategically important to the Chinese to get that capacity. So I didn't know that story, but I'm not amazed by it.
They didn't master which, sorry? They didn't master what kind of production?
The chip manufacturing. The silicon chips are incredibly, I mean, the technology actually comes out of the Netherlands, doesn't it, Vox? I think the main machines, but right now the main fabrication plants, the best fabrication plants in the world are in Taiwan. Yeah, which of course is looking increasingly like it might be accessible to the mainland. In the near future. If you wanted to pick out like one absolutely vital industry for modern capitalism, modern technology, it's chip manufacture, and for a long time that was an American monopoly. I don't know how the Netherlands company became the main producer of the I forgot what they call the actual lithographic.
I'm guessing it had to do with Philips and they got really into, they tried to push their own form of DVD and stuff, you may recall, and so Philips has always been at the fore with some of the other big American companies.
Yeah, so that means actually there's a Netherlands leg in, but it was still mainly American manufacturing, and then design of CPUs was very much like Intel versus Motorola.
Right. Well, I can tell you a funny story about Intel actually. Back in 1996, my friend and I had formed our computer game company, Fenris Wolf, and we'd focused on doing bundling deals with hardware companies because it's a lot easier to sell a whole bunch of games at once that way than get
individual.
Yeah, and plus then you have to work with a publisher, and this way you don't have to work with a publisher. So a friend of mine who happened to smoke a fair amount of pot and had really long hair walked outside of this. Microsoft was doing a big presentation on how they were entering games. And we were bored. So we walked out of it and we ran into two guys in suits, which was very unusual for the game developers conference. And we just started chatting with them because they said, you look like you might have a light. Do you have a light? so we gave them a light. Turns out they're from Intel. Yeah. We're like, what on earth are you doing here? They said, oh, we're going to come out with this new game chip, a new CPU that's like great for games. We're like, okay, cool. We start talking, and next thing we know, we're like one of the 14 companies that they've signed to develop games for this chip. But it's a really tight schedule. And so they signed 14 or 15 knowing that most of the companies wouldn't make it. But our little company in our little digital ghetto, at one point they sent like 14 high-ranking executives to visit. They outnumbered us like 2-1,
Wow.
like in the living room. And and the best part was our idiot drummer that we lived with had left his giant bong right in the middle. So fortunately, they didn't care. But the funny thing was, and this is the point I'm getting to about the whole like manufacturing quality thing. I mean, we were dealing with the very top. I mean, Andy Grove we met with him twice. But one day, so we're sitting there, we finally get the chip and we run the game on it and it's dog slow.
Wow.
It's supposed to be lightning fast, but it's dog slow. We're like, what the heck? What's going on? So we reduce it to the simplest possible thing, just throwing a black rectangle up on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So the chip is doing practically nothing.
Yeah.
And it's the same speed. And we're thinking, So one of the guys does the calculations of the speed. And our other guy says, that number looks really familiar. I'm like, how can that number look familiar to you? And then the other guy's, oh, crap. It's the bus speed. So what they did was they forgot. The chip is on the board. The bus is where the information passes through. Yeah. So the size of the portal for the information to pass through was 1/4 the size it needed to be to let the chip run at full capacity.
Right. Okay.
I mean, it was an epic screw up of such immense proportions. It essentially rendered the chip largely pointless. I mean, they still managed to sell umpteen millions of them, but for such a big, well-regarded and influential semiconductor to make an error of that magnitude was kind of shocking. So anything that's happened ever since has not surprised me.
With Intel slowly losing out to the reduced instruction set world over time. Yeah. Yeah,
because it was so fundamentally basic. I mean, how does no one in the entire company realize that all this stuff that's happening really fast on the chip has to go through the bus?
And to be communicated rapidly through the bus as well. So you've got to have a bus which you've got a Usain Bolt with lead shoes, effectively.
Exactly. And now they did come out with a faster bus. That's why they came out with AGP and all that. But that was 2 years later or whatever it was. So
and however many hundreds or millions of those sold, that's what disturbed me a little bit.
That's bringing us back to the economics and why this stuff persists. And that's partly people are afraid to speak out. And that's what you and I both irritate our own wings of politics. We are willing to speak out. We say this is logically flawed. It's not going to work. But the whole belief thing I was talking about earlier, when beliefs are shared, it's also you have to purge to some extent beliefs that are contradictory with the one that's being shared by the majority. So when you're somebody who says, well, that doesn't make logical sense, it's part of a belief system. It will have flaws. And if you come along and say that's a flaw, you get rejected. You become the conservative columnist that no conservatives want to hear from.
Right. Yeah, it's just part of the price you pay. I mean, personally, I don't care, and I know perfectly well that you don't either. There's no substitute for that moment of clarity when something that you were trying to figure out suddenly clicks and makes sense. And the part of the reason that you have to share it is because you don't truly understand something until you have articulated it in writing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
At least for me, I have to write it down in order to work the flaws out.
On that front, thank you very much, by the way, for the way you're syndicating Econ Comics. I'm loving it going out there. And at the moment, have you seen that, Daniel, the Econ Comics series?
No.
It's on Archive, which is that's one of your what do you call it? Your stable out of Kunda Castelia, isn't it? The cartoon series. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a site called ArcTunes that's basically the digital version of our print comics.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And on that, they're syndicating my Econ comic series, and it's actually right up the one now about the reality virus. And I mean, you can imagine this perverse pleasure I'm getting out of written a satire based on the idea of a pandemic in 2016, now being syndicated on Vox's cartoon site. And the virus is called reality, and it's infecting. It starts infecting. I think it started infecting freshwater economists, and then it starts affecting saltwater.
Saltwater,
yeah. And that part is being syndicated right now by Archaven.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, if your listeners are interested, they can go to archaven.com, and we've got, I think now, something like 45 weekly or 2 or 3 times a week series that are running there, and it's supported by subscribers, so it's free for people that just want to read it. I kind of laugh because Steve is doing this very intelligent, little bit esoteric comic on economics, and I am helping educate the world about the importance of killing vampires. My most popular comic is basically a vampire comic that is probably a little too violent. So
Okay.
I just realized that today when I put the picture up, and I was like, wow, I'm not sure if I approve of that.
Picture. Okay, describe the picture.
A ghoul has leaped out of a closet and attacked the guy, and he has rolled it over and pressed his pistol against the skull and pulled the trigger, and it tends to make a bit of a mess.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's very exciting, but it's not at all educational. And in fact, I frankly think
that in a cartoon. Yeah.
Yeah, I frankly decided that we needed to start adding warnings to. It's bad when the first comic that you're like, we really need to start putting a warning on there is your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
But c'est la vie. You get carried. I mean, you understand. You're telling a story, you get carried away.
Yeah.
With the logic of the story and everything, and then it's only later when you look at it that you're like, wow, I did not intend to go there.
Yeah, the story often writes itself when you get into the creative process. The momentum takes you in directions you never expected on your own volition to get there.
Yeah, right. I totally agree with that. I always, my mind goes to Anna Karenina and Leo Tolstoy when he said that she, took on a form of her own in the story. And I think one of the things, Vox, you must understand as a writer is that it's you can't always predict the unintended consequences of of how the readers are going to take things, let alone yourself, 3 to 5 years later, reflecting on your earlier work. So I think some of it's very freeing and liberating to see what this turns into. And it does have the ability, I think, great literature to build on itself in interesting and unique ways. So,
yeah, I don't think I would quite go to the great literature. I mean, it's comics.
Not the vampire cartoon.
Yeah, Steve's might be great literature. Mine would make a good movie. I'll put it. I'll leave it at that.
This is one you wrote yourself, or you're saying one you're publishing?
No, this is Midnight's War is actually, there's about 5 of them that I either write myself or I write with the legend Chuck Dixon. Speaking of the people who've been banished and unauthorized, he's the most prolific writer in Western comics. He's written Batman, he's written Punisher, he's written everything, and about 7 years ago, the editor-in-chief at Marvel said he will never work for us again because we don't approve of his politics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because he's a pretty normal he's not a radical like us. He's a fairly normal conservative, but that's become unacceptable at places like Marvel and DC now.
I mean, this is actually one thing. It's you're talking about effectively political correctness, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one funny thing that, I mean, we're getting towards our 10-minute mark here, Daniel, so you might want to bring it back where you wanted us to go, but I think this is an important issue. And like, I've seen the same thing in the left, because having been politically on the left since I was 18, I saw, people becoming religious about Marx as they once were religious about the church they belonged to. But I've also seen the development of neoliberalism, and I was not quite on the ground floor, but I was certainly outside the window where it started happening, because it began in Australia with the Labor Party government of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. And a large part of their philosophy was that we got trashed by the Conservative Party, known as Liberals over in Australia, because they are seen as better economic managers. We screwed up in the 70s. That was their perspective. So what we have to do in the future is marry progressive social politics with mainstream economics. And I was saying, look, this is disastrous. Mainstream economics is a myth. You might get away with it for a while, unleash a financial bubble and your economy will grow as a result for a while, but it's going to come crashing down around you. And what you'll end up doing is delegitimizing the progressive social policies you're trying to bring in the first place. And in many ways, that's happened. The economic crisis, of course, with 2008 is part of the economic breakdown, but it's ended up giving the whole idea of being reasonable to other people a bad name. And all the left has got involved in this identity politics, which means you're ignoring the interests of the working class who've been screwed by globalization over that period of time. And so the working class, who used to be the basis for the Labor Party, now vote for the Conservatives.
Well, yeah, I mean, Chuck is he's famous for like his street level stuff. He's like he's a working class writer, and that's who his stuff tends to appeal to. I mean, I often put in jokes in the comics that we write because we're from very different backgrounds, and I'm from a much more elitist background and all that sort of thing. And so, there's a sort of a natural creative tension when we work together that's actually quite exhilarating. But to me, it's fascinating that this, working class writer from Philadelphia is banished from the, by the New York progressives, who all have, literary degrees from Yale or something.
Yeah. It's been a bad choice of direction by the left.
Yeah, no, I would, let's just try and wrap a little bit up here. I think this is a very, very interesting conversation. And Vox, I want to extend an open invitation. We're going to switch the normal time to the one brought to you tonight. So open invitation, Vox, if you would like to come back. I think the lefty lunacy is what I call it. I do find myself moving from conservative to more of a liberal position, maybe pretty much in line with where Steve is. But the lunacy is just outrageous. It's just, it really is. And I find myself coming back to more of I guess more of a central but conservative sensibility standpoint. And I'd really like to see the conservatives come in line with the environmental push. And one more thing, I think there's so much that we can explore on the practicality of how we are as humans and how we form groups. And so I think to properly counterpoint a universal liberalism versus nationalistic tendencies, I think is a very, very, very important conversation to have as we move into a vastly and ever apparent crumbling economy. So on that note, guys, do you have any final thoughts on either of those? We'll go with Steve first, and Vox, you can.
I was just thinking, you have a guess at my least favorite John Lennon song.
Imagine.
Exactly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Imagine there's no nation. It's easy if you try bullshit. We are absolutely communally based species, and it's our community that we identify with, and the whole idea that we can think at a global level. Maybe one day, maybe we can have ethics and a philosophy that lets us do that and puts life as the primary thing humans are interested in. But at the moment, it's our community, and the whole idea that you can have a global level thing of taking over the national, I think, is a fallacy.
Steve, you realize that the first thing I'm going to post tomorrow when I link to this interview is Steve Keen is a nationalist! Exclamation point.
There we go.
Let's come out with the whole pandemic thing. It's that's one reason I'm in Thailand.
Well, the thing that was funny was when we, there was some crazy stuff going on with the arbitration law. And so some of us were working with the California legislature, and so Owen Benjamin, who is another band, he's a comedian who's another band guy. He said, so you guys are working with the California state legislature. The nationalists are working with the socialists. Where have I heard this before?
Okay, that's a dreadful note on which to finish.
Yes.
No, I just want, first of all, Daniel, I'd just like to point out, you may not have known this, but I don't do interviews.
Oh, okay.
And this is probably why. but the only reason I did it was because my wife was shocked. She's like, I said, I'm going to do this interview. She's like, you don't talk to the media. You don't do any interviews. I said, if the greatest living economist says, hey, come and do this thing with me, you answer yes. Yes, thank you. So I would just like to apologize to your listeners and point out that this is not what I do. So if it got a little random, keep in mind it's like 3 a.m. my time, and I don't do this anyhow.
It's cool. Well, have a good sleep, mate. It's been great to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to one of these days finally being in the same room.
Fantastic. Likewise. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah. See you guys.
Bye, guys.